Thank you guys for joining us here. My name's Charlie Miller. I'm the principal of M5 Advisors. We're an owner's rep for digital. We work on digital transformation projects and work with developers, cities that are doing large-scale digital networks and telecom projects. And I've got two great panelists here today. I'm going to introduce them in just a second, but I'd like to start our panel here today with a little bit of background on kind of what we're talking about. I want everyone to think about the last time you saw a digital sign out in public space. If you were paying attention when you came in today, there's a whole bunch on the outside of the convention center here. These are ubiquitous. You see them everywhere in our lives, from in your car at a red light, to in an elevator in an office building, to when you're riding the subway. But these screens can do a lot more than show advertising, and I think that's what we're going to talk about here today. We want to talk about how cities, developers, and transit agencies are building digital networks that provide civic value, things like wayfinding, real-time information and messaging, while also providing a long-term revenue stream. So I'd like to ask each of my panelists here today to introduce yourselves, tell us what you do, and give us a moment, maybe one moment, what I'll call a screen moment, that was either a deal, a deployment, a conversation that changed how you think about what these screen networks can do. So I'll start with you, Barry.
Hi there, everybody. Come join us. Yes, come join us. Learn about screen advertising for cities and for everything else, and how it generates revenue for cities and municipalities and information. So come on down, everybody. All right. So I run DPAA. I'm Barry Frey. It is the global trade organization for all the out-of-home advertising around the world. We have about 240 member companies. We have the whole ecosystem of data research, media owners, tech, hardware, software, programmatic, etc. And you want me to go further, or is that good?
Maybe share one moment that changed how you think what these screens can be used for. Maybe something from the recent past that you think about.
So we had a real kind of interesting moment during COVID, where we had a lot of members around the world that had screens and out-of-home advertising and expenses, but they had no eyeballs. So they weren't monetizing them, and it was a difficult financial situation in addition to everything else. And what we do is we kind of sat back and reinvented a lot of strategies. So one is that we went full on for programmatic, and programmatic is a kind of a trading mechanism, somewhat like the NASDAQ. I could explain if you want further.
We're going to talk about it in a few minutes, yeah.
And that made business happen. And then we introduced a lot of members that did not have activity, but had sales forces to other members that had a lot of activity, like gas stations and others. So as an example, our members in the office buildings didn't really have any real eyeballs, but they had a lot of great salespeople around the country. So we introduced many of our members to sales forces that all complemented each other. Even though they didn't have eyeballs, they were representing others. So it was a pretty powerful way to come out of a very difficult situation.
Yeah. Thanks. Scott,
Great.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Scott Goldsmith. I am the President and Chief Operating Officer of Intersection. The company's been around for about 25 years. I was one of the founders of the original company, which is called Titan. We're essentially an out-of-home advertising company that focuses exclusively on working with cities and transit authorities. We're a little bit different than our competitors, though, because while we're always focused on generating revenue from the sale of advertising on our partners' properties, we also have provided solutions around enhancing customer experience and providing real-time information at the right time at the right place, which, again, is incredibly important right now as transit authorities are all trying to bring people back to their rails and their buses after COVID. And we can talk a little bit about all the ways we do that in a bit.
What's your one screen moment?
The one screen moment was about a 10-year journey in New York City, which started buying a bunch of payphones in New York City, and then about 10 years later, turning them all into about 2,000 link kiosks, which is like, we'll talk about it a little bit later, the largest digital signage and free public Wi-Fi deployment in the history of the world.
There you go. All right. Okay, so I want to talk about four things today. I want to talk about how these deals get structured. I want to talk about digitization and what the case for digitization is. I want to talk about revenue, and I want to talk about civic value. So let's start with how to structure the deal. So Scott, you just said you co-founded Intersection and Titan before that. You practiced law, zoning law, before you worked in media.
Yes.
My question
Prepared me for 25 years in the out-of-home industry.
There you go. When a city or a developer is deciding whether to own, to operate, or to hand the keys to a partner, operator, kind of going through that decision-making process when they're setting out to build a digital screen network, what do they almost always get wrong before they've even issued the RFP?
Got it. Great question. So, as you probably understand, all of these deals have to be competitively bid, so there has to be an RFP process, and that's where the problems typically start. And there's sort of a couple problems with that. And the first and the most serious problem that cities and transit authorities run into in procuring these types of networks is that they don't check the market before putting an RFP out. So what often happens is an RFP goes out, there's unreasonable specifications about money or deployment. And so what we've encouraged our partners to do, and a lot of transit authorities have started doing this, is to check the market first, do an RFI, have competitors like us submit their ideas, and then build the spec based on that. So that's the number one. And by the way, a lot of these RFPs get canceled because the spec is so off and nobody responds. The other quick one is, and you'll see it as we talk about the network that we've built, is that there's been previous sort of concern about mixing digital advertising with real-time information. And so we don't believe that that's right. There's a really good reason that advertisers want to buy our screens, because they can reach people at the right time at the right place to help their brand grow. Same reason that transit authorities should want to reach people in real time, because it's a really valuable impression to help people commute in a much more convenient and comfortable way. So those are the two big mistakes people typically make.
What about, you guys see a lot of RFPs from cities and transit agencies. Are there telltale signs in a procurement process that kind of tells you immediately that this process is going to fail?
Yes, always the same thing, which is very narrow scope and very requirements on how much money you have to pay them without checking the market first, or who's going to pay for capital. The more open these RFPs are that allow competitors to go and respond and to be creative about the response, that's typically how the best procurements end up.
Great, thanks. Barry, I want to talk to you about digitization. I mean, obviously with DPAA, you're focused on digital screens. So you've spent more than a decade making the case on the media side to brands, to agencies, and investors that digital out-of-home deserves a seat at the media planning table. And I think now that we're in 2026, we see that you were right. You were largely right in that argument. So I want you to make that argument for people here today who may be more on the civic side, municipalities, transit. How should they approach revenue generation from digital? Maybe talk a little bit about programmatic and dynamic content. How should they justify the capital investment in a digital screen network?
Well, there's two buckets. One is that it provides revenue to cities, to municipalities. And the other bucket is it provides, as Scott said, very relevant information, whether it's news, sports, weather, or if the train lines are getting delayed. So those are the two buckets, relevant information. I would also add entertainment and content information. You folks do a great job of putting really interesting stuff on your screens. It enhances the experience in municipality. When you walk by a linked screen and you see something, who won at the U.S. Open today and what's going on tomorrow, people feel good about their cities. They feel good about the information. And then you mentioned programmatic. Programmatic is basically kind of like the NASDAQ, where the buyers put up what they want to buy, the sellers put up what they want to sell at what price, and the algorithms make a match. And it takes some of all that human touch and feel and at times slowness out of the equation, and is very efficient. Of course, we want to also keep the humans involved, but programmatic has accelerated this as well as the digital screens, because now we're seeing money flow from digital advertising and from video advertising, television, the Googles of the world, to digital screens, because we are offering advertising that's relevant by time, by temperature, by available audience. We understand the audience in front of the screens, and we have, guys like you in front of the screens. We're going to serve up, very expensive first-class flights on Delta on that. So it's a really powerful form of advertising, And then, of course, relative to other media, it is you can't skip the commercials. It's incredible in this world of AI and fake news and fake ads. It's incredibly, you know, powerful and honest and decent. If you weren't putting the right thing on the screens in this one-to-many environment, you get tomatoes thrown at it. So it's incredibly authentic when we're really looking at a lot of other forms of media as having inauthenticity, which I couldn't say after dinner.
What about the revenue side, though? Just probing onto programmatic a little bit more. How does that change, or how has the revenue model had to adapt as we think about programmatic? Does it change the game for these networks in terms of how revenue flows?
It does basically bring in digital monies and video monies heretofore not available to out-of-home advertising. At the beginning, people were afraid of a race to the bottom on cost per thousands because of the algorithms. They were afraid of not controlling their inventory, but that's really been exacerbated. The problems don't exist. The systems enable media owners to understand what's going to be in the screen, and municipalities, and also control their pricing. In fact, the pricing and the value for the screen has gone up because if we can, as opposed to just targeting, say, everybody in New York City, if we can now target people that are upscale, that are 18 to 24, media math indicates that the higher, the more fractionalized the demo, the higher the cost per thousand to generate that is. So it becomes much more powerful, and media owners do both.
And Scott, follow up on that. Like, have you had to help educate cities and transit authorities around programmatic and around how it works and sort of what's in it for them? And
less so. We've had to educate the market, our own salespeople. We've had actually, we created an entire new division of the company that was based programmatically. The revenue is $1 of direct sale and $1 of programmatic sales. It's essentially the same to our partners. But like at this point, about 10% of our revenue is going to be programmatic this coming year.
Got it. Okay. Well, let's talk more about revenue. So I want to talk about. I wanted to ask Scott about Link NYC. I think we have a slide that we can cut over to, which might help frame this conversation. There it is. Cool. Great. That worked.
Okay, so thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about Link. So if anybody has ever been in New York City before 2010, there used to be 28,000 payphones in New York City. And somewhere around 2009, it became really clear that those payphones were really just taking up a lot of space. They had some advertising around the outside of them, but it had become, which was previously an iconic and interesting way for people to connect with a dime or a quarter back in the day, became a sort of a useless infrastructure. So from 2009, we bought a bunch of payphones in 2007 from Verizon, and from 2007 to 2015, we worked really closely with the city of New York on a plan to recreate the payphone, and Link is that creation. It took about 6 years and an RFP, but today there are over 2,000 Link kiosks deployed in New York City, and really was it a good example of repurposing what was an antiquated and useless infrastructure to something that people really loved, and that's what Link is up there. Just every single Link has massively fast free Wi-Fi to everybody in New York City. It has two 55-inch dynamic screens that have a combination of advertising and city content, which I'll talk about a little bit later. There's a touchscreen display in the middle that looks a little bit like an iPad, which has all kinds of city information, emergency messaging, and a 911 button, and also there's free charging, which is also a great amenity for folks in New York. We just had the 10th anniversary of Link, and sort of thinking about successes and sort of challenges. It really has become a ubiquitous part of New York City. As someone I was born and raised in New York, and having been involved in something to change the way the streetscape looks was something really exciting for me. We've served we've actually given out $35 million of free phone calls, because I forgot to mention that it had to have a payphone in it, but it's free, so you can call anywhere in the United States for free, and we've done about 35 million payphone calls. There's about 25 million people have signed up as Wi-Fi users. 25% of the screen time goes to the city, and the new administration, Mayor Mondami, has actually really taken part of these screens and used it to his benefit on all kinds of interesting programs and giving people information in the city. And most importantly, because it's free, symmetrically, free gig Wi-Fi, This has really helped create lessen the digital divide in New York City because a lot of these links are in previously underserved neighborhoods, and having massively fast free Wi-Fi has been a real game changer for folks.
Yeah. Well, so those are like the highlights, and it's been really transformative and pretty amazing to see.
Wait, sorry.
But I know that in the early years, there was a ramp, right? It took a while. Obviously, these things took a long time to deploy. Well, not a long time, several years to deploy across the city. I know there was early concerns around privacy, and you had to sort of adapt to user behaviors and kind of the tablet use. So I guess my question is, what would you tell a city CIO or a developer who's thinking about entering into a concession like this today about that revenue ramp and about sort of like what those early years looked like and how to think about it?
Great. So that's what Link looks like right now. And if you know New York City, you could see how ubiquitous it really is. They're all over a lot of Manhattan, but in the Bronx, Staten Island. So they're just about everywhere. When we first started, because the fiber was running up and down 3rd Avenue and 8th Avenue, it was really difficult to start selling these displays because we only had a very small subset of the city. And over time, the revenue ramped, and we're up into the up into $70-80 million a year now on a yearly basis for revenue.
That's ad revenue. Yeah.
That's ad revenue. So first, it takes time to ramp a network like this. The second is it costs more, always costs more than you think. We ran 10 strands of fiber to every one of these units. We had to break the street, so incredibly expensive. So you have to make sure the revenue is going to be able to support that. Privacy is always a big issue. As usual, the ACLU sued us within the first year and said it's not private enough and there's not enough accessibility. So we work with them to come up with a much more accessible model. So there's all kinds of accessibility issues. And lastly, and I think the most interesting is, like, you never know what's going to happen when you put new technology on the streets of a city like New York. When we first put it out, the first thing that happened is because there was an iPad that was accessible, that had web accessibility, people were literally pulling up couches and watching YouTube videos, which was a real problem for other people being able to use it. And so we had to work on ways to make it more accessible and easier to use, and quite frankly, not quite as attractive for people to sit and watch it because it was interfering with the advertising.
Yeah. Interesting. Barry, what about, I'm curious, from DPAA, like, your members have launched networks like this around the globe, I imagine. Like, talk about some of the initial revenue concerns that you've seen over the years and how things have ultimately played out today. I'm curious what you see from your perspective across your membership.
Well, of course, there was a CapEx and investment early on, and there was some time and work. But, going forward to where we are today, with a lot of our larger members that were significant companies, generating some of them billions of dollars, they're finding that approximately where maybe 7% of their spaces are now digital, it's generating about 30% of their revenue.
Wow.
And the reason for that is that there's more ads up there. In the old days in out-of-home advertising, you would have make a right here and go to McDonald's, and that ad would stay there for about maybe 6 months or a year. Now we can change it, as I mentioned, by the time of day, by the temperature, by the audience. So you can not only get more ads, which generates more revenue, but it's more relevant advertising to the environment. And that also empowers advertisers and also empowers cities if it's more relevant advertiser. And I would encourage cities and everybody in the ecosystem to think in some ways like a programmer. Early on, we had a lot of members that were running ads back to back, and a lot of my experience comes from building TV channels and sports around the world. So I'm encouraging all of our members to think like a programmer. You want people to look at it. You want people to stay. You want it to be sticky. And there's certain programming sensibilities to programming a screen that are tried and true methods. So as people have learned this, they're putting up good, relevant content, important content, relevant to time, relevant to the audience in front of the screen. And the same thing with advertising. So this is the way it's going. It does take some CapEx, but you can't hold back progress and you can't hold back digitization.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's talk about that type of information you just mentioned, that relevant information. I want to talk about these screens as civic assets, as assets within a city that are about more than advertising. So, Scott, perfect. So providing civic information has become core to Intersection's offering, as you said at the top. I'm curious how this works with a city. So or a transit agency. So, like, for example, you mentioned some examples to me, like a heat warning this summer, you can tell that story, or an Amber Alert needs to go out. What actually happens? How does this work with the city in terms of the mechanics of getting relevant information onto a screen, whether it's day-to-day information or emergency information?
Great question. I'll start with just saying that I think one of the things that we've seen and one of the reasons that Intersection has been successful over the last 25 years is that one of the biggest challenges that transit authorities and cities have is reaching people at the right time at the right place. So as I said, I grew up in New York, and I don't know if anybody was from New York or any other transit authority. If you remember, before 2010 or so, there was no digital screens on transit authority properties. There was no Wi-Fi. And what you would do when you wanted to figure out where the train was coming is you'd walk up to the side of the platform and look over to see if it was coming. Barry remembers. You see the lights on the rail.
That was a good safety element leading into the train.
Right. And so, with the advent of real-time information, which has been done in most transit authorities, and we've worked with them on that, it totally changes the way that people experience commuting. Commuting is really difficult, and the best way to help fix it is to enhance customer experiences, to give people really good information at the right time at the right place, which we've worked really closely with our transit authorities. So again, as I pointed earlier, one of the things about having advertising and real-time information at the same time is it makes the screens really, really sticky, so people have a reason to look up. So it benefits both the advertiser because folks are looking up to see the screen at the right time to see the ad, but they're also be able to see the real-time information, which is a good example up here of that top one these are both CTA screens, and we've started working with CTA in 2009, but you can see there's an ad on top and then 2 cards of information about when the next train is coming. We found this to be a really successful way to both generate revenue but also provide real-time information to folks.
I'm curious in terms of potential halo effect benefits, like in addition to obviously giving the city a channel for relevant information, emergency information, et cetera. I'm curious if you've seen other halo effects in terms of just perception of the city. This is a vocal channel where a city can communicate with its residents and constituents.
Yeah, so there's a couple really hardcore benefits. Like this is a great example up here. I don't know if in New York this winter we had an incredibly difficult winter. 18 people died from exposure for the first couple weeks of the year. So the mayor's office contacted us and asked us to work with them on a program to create some dynamic citywide warming center messaging. So our engineering team overnight came up with this up here, which is essentially like, here's your nearest warming center. You can go here, and there were tons of them all over the city. So we think this really saves some lives. We've done a bunch of this work with the recent administration on warming centers and other emergencies, which makes a real difference in communicating in real time with likely a lot of previously underserved New Yorkers, which is a really good reason. To your halo effect, I always tell this story whenever I'm talking to a transit authority, is that, every morning I get 20 Google alerts from each of the transit authorities that we work with, so LA Metro and CTA and New Jersey Transit, and the news is not good. It's really unfortunate. The press, the United States press, loves to take pot shots at transit authorities and cities about not providing good service. New Jersey Transit is constantly in the press for delays, Amtrak issues. One of the things that we found when we build products like this and provide better information, like in the city of Philadelphia, we built bus shelters and we put real-time information. The next day, there were a bunch of tweets from like folks who typically take pot shots at SEPTA that said, hey, this is amazing. For the first time ever, there's real-time information. I know when the bus is coming. So to Charlie's question, this has created a halo effect from our partners, which is like they're really trying hard to get customers to come back to the system after COVID by giving them better information. What's also really cool is that there's sort of a virtuous cycle that happens here, which is that if the transit authority provides better information, enhances customer experience, more people come back to the transit authority, take the bus, take the train, which enhances the fare box revenue, but also creates more eyeballs for us to sell ads to. So it really is a virtuous circle, and you're seeing a lot of improvements on transit authorities. Stephanie Wiggins from LA Metro was here this morning. We've done a ton of work with them, and that system is exploding right now with new stations and all kinds of really interesting innovation that is helping drive new customers into the system and more revenue.
Great, thank you. Barry, maybe just touch on touch on the revenue versus civic value question a little bit. And I know we're running low on time, but how do you pitch a screen network to an investor or lender when some of the value is around the type of civic, use cases that Scott outlined, but ultimately it's about revenue generation. Are blended metrics showing up in this yet, or how do you think about the sort of value proposition of these networks?
Well, there's a lot of metrics, but I would go back to the halo effect that you asked and Scott was indicating. This extends to the cities and the advertisers. When you think of media today, there is a lot of fake media. There is a lot of media that's skewing one way or the other, that may be next to a terrorist website or may have AI-driven articles there. But well, like I said, when you're in a one-to-many medium like this and you're in public, there's great credibility. Also, I would encourage municipalities to have great equipment and great screens like LG screens. We got our friend in Limey over here who's one of the key LG guys, one of the great prognosticators of media, Marshall McLuhan, who coined such terms as global village and the medium, the message, talks about that, the quality of the medium portrays the message. So if a city's got high quality screens, great content, great information, the city and the city experience is better. And of course, that halo effect is clearly lent to the advertisers as well that appear in the screen, rather than, I said, being in a right skewing or left skewing environment. This is a positive city skewing environment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I realize we're just about at time, so here's the final question for both of you guys. Maybe Scott first. If folks here are thinking about, or somewhere in the process of procuring screen networks like this, or working with partners like yourself, what decision does everyone here need to get right as they think about bringing digital networks into their city or transit authority or private, real estate development environment?
I think it's also, as I said earlier, it really starts with procuring it properly, trying to get information from from potential competitors before you start, which will make the RFP better. And the last thing I'd say is you really need to make sure that the revenue model around the system is sustainable, because and potentially putting some flexibility in the agreements. Over the course of my career at Intersection, we've gone through two massive sort of major macro events with the financial crisis of 8, 9, and 10 and COVID. Both of those events required a massive renegotiation of these types of contracts. So inserting some flexibility into the contracts if the worst happens is a really good way to start. So those are the things I would.
Yeah.
Yep.
What about you, Barry? What do people need to get right as they think about building networks like this when they're at sort of the precipice?
Well, as I mentioned, you got to think quality. That's really important. You want to get a good partner like Scott in Intersection that really knows the ad business as well. And I would suggest people to think like TV programmers. You've got a screen here. You've got content. You have audience. You've got the public. So you've got to think like a programmer and to attract and have people stick around and utilize it. And that's really important. So I would encourage those methods. Think like a media company.
Great. All right. Well, we hear the voice of from the heavens here. I think that means wrap up. So thank you guys so much. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Barry, for a great conversation. Thanks everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.